Ray Epps gets a 6-month sentencing recommendation from the Department of Justice, which is pretty incredible given the fact that Ray Epps was this guy standing outside the Capitol screaming, "We're going into the Capitol the day before." And Ray Epps was also there at the first breach, screaming into Ryan Samsel's ear, who knows what's there, but he gets a 6-month plea deal or sentencing recommendation, while we have other people who were there on J6 who did conduct much less serious than this, who are getting much more significant penalties. And so we're going to go through the Department of Justice's, their own sentencing recommendation, which really reads more like a defense attorney's sentencing recommendation, before we hear from Ray Epps himself, because he wrote a letter to the judge saying, "Tucker Carlson attacked me and I'm scared." So we're going to read from that. We've also got another interesting J6 defendant known as FreeStateWill on X at FreeStateWill. Great follow, somebody who's doing amazing work and really fighting hard in this arena. And he's asking a very interesting question. You know, if Ray Epps gets a 6-month deal, I can't wait till I get my 6-month deal from the Department of Justice, since equal protection, you know, no one's above the law and everything's kind of congruent, isn't it? We'll see. But this is what the Department of Justice, that they call themselves, which is just laughable. Here's what they've submitted on behalf of Ray Epps. Okay, this is Ray Epps, who took a plea deal. Now he's getting ready for sentencing. And here's what the government says. They say, "The United States of America, by the Attorney General out of Columbia, we are now here submitting our sentencing memorandum against Ray Epps. And here's what we want." Now, just for context, we know that the Oath Keepers, they're going to prison for a long time. Okay, and by the way, Ray Epps, just so we're familiar, was a former Oath Keeper, if you're not familiar with that story. Not only was he there screaming to go into the Capitol and, you know, inciting, encouraging people to violence, in my opinion, from what I saw, he also was a former Oath Keeper, okay, which is the same thing that Stewart Rhodes was. And Stewart Rhodes is going to prison for over 20 years, I believe. A long time. So you just compare and contrast this to the other Oath Keepers who got decades in prison. Ray Epps, they say, "The government, this is the DC J6 prosecutors, we request that this court sentence to Ray Epps to 6 months incarceration." 6 months, that's it, which is the high end of the applicable guidelines. So the judge, the sentencing guidelines based on the plea deal, can go all the way down to 0. Isn't that fun? So Ray Epps could maybe get no time. We'll see. The government is going to ask for the max, which is 6. Ray Epps and his team are going to ask for 0, the minimum. And then we'll get something maybe in the middle. And if he does get time, he's going to get, you know, credit for time for, you know, he'll go in. He's not going to serve the full 6, in other words, what I'm saying. And the government also requests a $500 restitution fee. 6 months, $500 restitution, and 1 year of supervised release, which is incredible because he was one of the most outspoken insurrectionists of the whole thing. Like, the internet knows this guy because he was so outspoken. It's not a random thing. We're all asking ourselves, why was this guy, by the way, he was also on the FBI's most wanted list for violent insurrectionists. Okay, so during the first wave of all this, before somebody figured out who this guy actually was, he was on the most wanted list. Not just any most wanted list, violent most wanted list. And then they figured out who he was and suddenly they didn't need him anymore. So here's the introduction. This is from the DOJ, the so-called Justice Department. Okay. They say Ray Epps is a 62-year-old former Marine. He's a roofer. He's a handyman. He's a farmer. He's a venue operator, and he's now retired. Okay, this is what a defense attorney would say. He participated in the January 6th attack. Like, look at that. He's a roofer. He's a handyman. He's a farmer. He's a venue operator, and he's now retired. It's like, okay, does he also walk little old ladies across the street, you know, and like volunteer at his local community? What are you talking about? Prosecutors don't write this way. They say he participated in the J6 attack on the Capitol, a violent attack that interrupted Congress, that threatened the peaceful transfer of power, injured more than 100 police officers, and resulted in $2.9 million in damages, which is like nothing. Billions were lost in the summer of love, okay? And they keep throwing that number around. It's like meaningless. Now, as of January 7, 2023, 2.9 million, and that's the loss. Anyways, now Epps pleaded guilty, totally rigged indictment, in my opinion, a pre-indictment, so he had a deal before he got charged, okay? Most other people, they get charged first, and then they get arrested, and then they get locked up, mugshotted, fingerprinted, the whole thing. Then they get pretrial conferences, there's pretrial proceedings, and then they get a plea deal. Not Ray Epps. Ray Epps took a plea deal before he was even indicted, pre-indictment. And what did they give him? Oh, disorderly conduct. Great. Which is the most generic term ever in the history of criminal law. Were you acting disorderly? Yeah. Did you disturb the peace and well-being of other people around you? Yeah. Okay. That's why it's a 6-month max potential penalty, but certainly everything else is appropriate. 0 time. So the government's recommended sentence is supported by Epps's efforts. He, on January 5th and the day of January 6th, inspired and gathered a crowd to storm the Capitol, actively screaming about this. He was also present among the vanguard of rioters that overwhelmed the police at 3 key breach points, which opened the floodgates to a mob that became thousands strong. You're telling us that he was at 3 key breach points and he was at the vanguard and he was inspiring all of these people? Wow. He also had presence in General assistance, he pushed a large metal framed sign into a group of police officers holding a defensive line, smashing this sign into the police. Rah! He also participated in a rugby scrum-like group effort to push past the same line of police officers. Sounds like violence. Probably why he was on the FBI's most wanted list. Now, the court must also consider that his conduct on January 6th, like the conduct of other defendants, took place in the context of a large and violent riot that relied on numbers to overwhelm the police, which probably wouldn't have been overwhelmed if they would have just accepted Trump's help to bring in the National Guard, but they rejected that. They say this is a unique case. Okay, that's interesting because there were a lot of J6ers who've been prosecuted. We've covered a lot of them here. Although Epps engaged in felonious conduct, his case includes a variety of distinctive and compelling mitigating factors. Wow. And that led the government to exercise its prosecutorial discretion. And we offered Ray Epps a pre-indictment misdemeanor plea deal. Okay, let's see. They say, first of all, Ray Epps turned himself into the FBI early, 2 days after the FBI. January 8th, he immediately became aware that the FBI was trying to identify him because he was on the most wanted violent list. He cooperated with both the FBI and Congress, gave Liz Cheney everything she wants, multiple lengthy voluntary interviews, which were horrendous. We read the deposition here for Ray Epps, the full 80, 90 pager. That video's on our channel. But you remember in that interview, we read, he said he went into the Capitol. Now they keep saying he didn't, but we read it as though he said, I did. Now the transcript was so botched because all the Congress people were asking questions simultaneously and they muddled it up intentionally so he couldn't see who was asking and who was answering. But point is, in my opinion, there's enough evidence to say this dude went into the building. Anyways, he engaged in at least 5 efforts on January 6th to de-escalate the conflict, and he tried to avoid violence. Oh, that's nice. He also expressed what appears to be sincere remorse. He's so sorry. Although he continues to blame members of Antifa, Ray Epps continues to speciously blame members of Antifa, secretly posing as Trump supporters for the violence, which is probably true. He says finally Epps has been the target of a false and widespread conspiracy theory that he was an undercover government agent on J6. And they forgot a period here. Now here, after accounting for the aggravating and all the mitigating factors, we got all these problems like Ray Epps at 3 different breaches, Ray Epps screaming at people to go into the Capitol. Ray Epps was a former Oath Keeper. He also turned himself in early and he's really sorry about it. So after accounting for all of these things, we get a recommendation of 6 months of incarceration. Saying here, to avoid unnecessary exposition, the government refers to the general summary of the attack on the Capitol. In the evening of January 5th, Ray Epps stood amidst the crowd. He was there at the BLM Plaza. It's so wild that they have a whole plaza there after they torched the country in 2020, but okay. In response to people around him proclaiming their anger at and their desire to fight Antifa and BLM, Epps said, "Tonight you can bring shame on us. That's not what this is about." Another person challenged Epps, and Epps said, "We're far beyond that. In fact, tomorrow," Ray Epps said this. He said, "I don't even like to say it because I'll be arrested. We need to go in to the Capitol. We're here to defend the Constitution. I'm just going to put this out there. I'm probably going to jail for it," says Ray. "Tomorrow, we need to go into the Capitol." Into the Capitol, he said peacefully. Now, other than his 4 years in service, Epps has never been a government employee or an agent, which nobody was ever saying. Again, I don't think Ray Epps showed up and got a badge, government FBI informant, or that he's on HR. Nobody's saying that, but he was an Oath Keeper. He is getting 6 months in jail. A lot of other people are not. Let's see. Epps' speech was recorded and broadcast over social media. We remember this one. That's him screaming, "Into the Capitol, into the Capitol." And people there are saying, this dude's a Fed. He's wearing a beige shirt, desert camouflage, brown backpack, says Trump all over the place. Epps was recorded telling one group, he said, Epps said, "As soon as the president is done speaking, we go to the Capitol. The Capitol is this way." He said, "As soon as Trump is finished speaking, we're going to the Capitol. It's that direction. That's where our true problems lie." When Trump began speaking, Epps, along with many others, left the rally, walked right towards the Capitol. At 12:52, when Trump was still addressing the crowd, a small group of people, including Epps, and this is the government speaking, they assembled near the monument. Bicycle barricades had area signs closed. Shortly after, the mob of rioters reached this outermost barrier, which was unguarded by officers. It's crazy. They know 1 million people are going to be there. A barrier is unguarded. They just walk right in, and Ray Epps walked them right to it. Rioters threw the barricades aside, and the crowd, including Ray Epps, who's funneling people, like with the airplane things, this way, right to the Capitol. Come on, this way. Go left, into the building. Perfect. Ray Epps, who was standing nearby at the very front, surged forward. He surged forward, breaching the first line of defense for the Capitol grounds and entering the restricted area. Ray Epps, the first one through. 6 months. Okay. Now, after the breach of the outer perimeter, Scores of people advance past the trampled barricades. Approximately 100 feet up the walkway, the crowd approached a second set of barricades, which were guarded by a small group of Capitol Police officers, like, a couple guys. Give them the new guys too, give them the interns. Send them out there. Here's the scene. We remember this. Ryan Samsel, who's also being prosecuted, says less than 1 minute after arriving at the second barricade, members of the crowd grew agitated. One member of the crowd, black shirt, later identified as Samsel, turned his baseball cap around. Epps was standing at the very forefront of the mob of rioters. Epps right at the front. And here it says Epps approached Ryan Samsel and spoke in his ear. Now, we don't know what he said, but Epps, throughout various interviews, he's repeatedly said that he whispered something like he said, dude, relax. The cops are just doing their job right there. Now, Samsel has provided multiple contradictory statements, and so the government does not include this incident where Epps was attempting to de-escalate. Of course not, because he was there, orchestrating people into it. We're going into the Capitol, going into the Capitol, going into the Capitol. And then suddenly he stops right here and he says, hey, everybody calm down. Okay, so they continue. They tell us seconds later at 12:54, the group of rioters on the front line aggressively shook the barricades and attacked the officers trying to stop them. With Epps standing nearby and looking on, there's Ray. You go, oh, perfect. The rioters violently overwhelmed the officers and they destroyed the barricades and surged forward. So at that moment, right, if Ray Epps is like, I'm done, I don't want to be any part of this, he leaves, right? He's gone. I don't want to be involved in this. Knocking over the barricades, Epps is just looking on because he's so innocent. Now, the flood of rioters, again, with Epps near the front, they then storm through the down barricades. And Ray Epps is right there. He's running through it, further penetrating their restricted area, setting an example, literally leading other rioters to follow. He opened a wide path for the mob to do this. It's Ray Epps right there, front of the pack, breaching everything. Now, a short way down to the path, a group of rioters, including Epps, they encountered a third set of barriers, a waist-high fixed metal fence. They just threw those out of the way. And once again, Epps, again, near the front. This is the DOJ who's going to give him 6 months, or they're writing this. He rushed past a third set of down barricades and continued to penetrate the restricted Capitol grounds. By 1 p.m., less than 10 minutes after being outside the outer perimeter, Epps and a group of other large rioters made their way to the West Plaza, a restricted area on the Capitol grounds just outside the Capitol building. There they are. There's Ray Epps tucked away in the corner down there. Still very active. Now, lines of uniformed Capitol Police and MPD officers were there to stop their further advance, but rioters continued to assault them with fists and pepper spray and flagpoles. But they were ultimately able to reform a line and push the crowd away from the building. This is the exhibit here. You can see this yellow line, which is the line. Meanwhile, an unrelated group of rioters wheeled a large Trump sign all over the place. See that large Trump sign right there? Well, Ray Epps is going to be involved in that. Maybe he wanted that Trump sign specifically, which measured 8 feet by 10 feet tall. Now, while the sign itself was made of fabric, it was metal in frame. Once the group arrived, the rioters gathered, they lifted it overhead, and they passed it across the crowd like it was being crowd surfed. Now, when the sign reached the middle of the plaza where Epps was standing, rioters worked together to turn the sign 90 degrees and they pushed it towards the officers. During the group push, Epps briefly placed both of his hands near or on the sign's fabric and or frame for several seconds. Sounds like pushing it. Why are they writing it this way? Briefly place both of his... Is he holding onto it for like leverage? Like at a stall or something? What's he doing? He's pushing this into the police. That's an attack on the officers. So why is he getting a disorderly conduct charge? Why isn't this assault on the police? Epps appeared to reach for the sign, both as it passed overhead and after it cleared his space. Reaching. Okay. Now, once the sign was beyond reach, Epps pointed forward toward the line of police officers several times, pointing. Cops are that way. Seconds later, at 1:40, other rioters, they successfully pushed the sign into a group of the police that Ray Epps helped to get there. The sign's immense size and forcible impact broke and scattered the police line. Ray Epps was there doing it. The officers managed to wrest the sign away from the rioters, but while officers were occupied with the sign, a group of rioters, including Epps, pushed forward in its wake, leaning their bodies on each other like a rugby scrum. This is the DOJ admitting that Ray Epps did all of this, by the way. This is not my interpretation or the defense or anybody else. They're giving him 6 months for this. Now, police officers responded by deploying chemical spray on the rioters, and the rioters, including Epps, immediately fell back on dispersed. But Ray Epps remained on the Capitol for another 30 minutes. Evidence shows that during this time on the Capitol, both before and after his participation as described above, Epps made 5 attempts to de-escalate the conflicts, I'm sure, including with attacking police. Specifically, Epps walked back and forth in a few feet of space between the line of police and the mob, and on multiple occasions, he tried to persuade hostile rioters who seemed primed for violence. He said, calm down. For example, Epps walked up to one rioter just as the rioter was yelling at a police officer. Somebody was saying, take that swing. Take a swing at me, MFer. Take that swing. What are you saying? Speak up. Take off that effing thing. I'd love to get on it. I've come locked and loaded. Epps put his hand on the rioter and he said, sir, touches him on his shoulder. Sir, take a step back. We're holding ground. We're not not trying to get people hurt. He's saying we're holding ground. So he's part clearly of this so-called insurrection. We've made our point. It doesn't matter. Just back up. We don't want to take away from what we did, what Ray did, taking ownership for it. So Epps then continued down the line. He said other things. When Epps returned, he told a rioter, he said, all right, they have a job. Don't beat up the cops. Now, while still on the West Plaza, Epps relied on earlier text messages from his nephew. Nephew told Epps, be safe. Epps replied to an earlier text message to his nephew, telling Epps to be safe. He wrote, Ray Epps said this, I was in front with a few others. Ray Epps says, quote, I also orchestrated it. That's Ray Epps' own words, admitting, I also orchestrated it, which is crazy because other people who orchestrated the insurrection were charged with seditious conspiracy. They're going to prison for 20 years, talking about the Oath Keepers. Stuart Rhodes, who was his friend, by the way, they were walking together, marching together in Arizona. Ray Epps was marching literally with Stuart Rhodes at Oath Keeper proceedings in Arizona. Stuart Rhodes going to prison for 20 plus years, Ray Epps going for 6 months. I don't know why. Stuart Rhodes wasn't even there at the Capitol, by the way. No violence, no signs, didn't throw anything at anybody, was not even there 20 years. Epps left the Capitol grounds soon after. He did not enter the Capitol building, which I totally still disagree with. By Ray Epps' own deposition, I don't trust that. Until we've reviewed every single hour of the 444,000 hours of video or whatever, I don't believe that. I think Ray Epps did go into the building. We read the transcripts here. He says, I went in. He said I went in. Anyways, he didn't go into, let's say, the Senate chamber. I would say that's probably true, but we saw it in his depot. Now, shortly after leaving the Capitol grounds, Epps gave an interview to an unknown individual that was recorded. The interviewer summarized Epps' position as follows. They said, so you're saying you're marching down there and it's one more thing that we as patriots can do to show these elected officials, look, we didn't just come out here to jump around and yell and scream. We came here to be visible. We came here to make a point. And that's right where you are, right? That's exactly what you're saying. You want these guys to know? Epps then agreed with the interviewer's summary. So then Ray Epps, of course, showed up on the FBI's most wanted list. On January 6th, the FBI posted online a number of photographs of, quote, persons of interest, violence at the Capitol. Photograph 16 was Ray Epps right there. So the person who was assembling all these said, we got to get the most violent people first. Go get them. Ray Epps is on the list. 2 days later, though, Epps called the tip line. Hey, that's me. He gave a lengthy consensual interview about his activities, and he admitted that he attended Stop the Steal. He also admitted to observing other rioters tear down barricades. And then he came in on March 3rd, 2021. His lawyer was there. They interviewed and participated in consensual follow-up interviews with the FBI. Epps identified himself in photographs. He stated when the word started to spread that the riot goers were going to the Capitol, he decided to help spread the message. He wanted to be front of the pack. He said he understood that he was trespassing, and while he intended to enter, he did not intend to break in. His goal was to walk in the front door and just protest. So then he went and met with the J6ers. Now, beginning with an article published by Revolver, great article, Epps became the centerpiece of a conspiracy theory for J6. According to the conspiracy, he was an undercover federal agent or something, informant. Doesn't necessarily need to be an agent or an actual government person. Epps then became a polarizing figure, got a lot of attention. They say Epps, who has never been a government employee or an agent, which again, we're not saying that, other than his 4 years of service in the Marines, was interviewed by the Select Committee, illegally constituted. Epps cooperated with Congress. The transcript of his interview is available. It's a terrible transcript. And in my opinion, he admits he went into the Capitol. Now, during the interview, he admitted, okay, again, that his goal was to get as many people into the Capitol as we can, surround it, let them know we're not happy with what happened. When they asked him what the step was, when he asked about orchestrating it, he says, well, I mean, I just helped to get people there. And I took credit because I was proud that we were there. But at the time, I didn't see the whole picture. Okay, I got caught up in something, just like many other people did. He was unaware of the extent of violence and damage that ensued, just like a lot of other people did. Now, he described the riot as terrible and sad, but he said this conspiracy, he says that the actual violence there was undercover members of Antifa posing as Trump supporters and trying to hijack a righteous protest, which I think is probably true. Now, on September 18th, the United States charged Epps with 1 count of disorderly conduct. Total joke. He pled guilty. He's got to pay $500 in restitution to the architect of the Capitol. Now, as noted, they say the plea agreement, he could face up to 12 months imprisonment pursuant to the plea. They're not asking for that. They're asking for 6. Supreme Court has said that we got to follow the guidelines. Ray Epps went to probation. They determined his criminal likelihood of reoffending and all the things. They say we are now looking at the sentencing guidelines, and we agree with probation that this section does not apply. Specifically, Epps contributed to the rioters' push of a metal frame into a group, and he did participate in a rugby scrum, but we are aware of 3 cases in which the courts have rejected that application, and they're giving us other cases. And the government, the court should also not apply this subsection because the J6 riot was a violent attack that threatened the lives of legislators. 2.9 million in other damages. Many rioters collectively disrupted this. And we also have this provision talking about the recidivism rates. And due to the unique nature of this, that this sentence is appropriate to deter a person like this. And so finally, to avoid unnecessary litigation, if you decide to apply this to sentencing, we can do it this way. Here are the factors. They tell us this is the nature and the circumstances of the offense. The attack on the Capitol was a grave attack. And while Epps' participation in the attack, you should consider that, you should also consider the various factors. The most important factor here, Epps encouraged the mob to storm the Capitol. He was present at the breach of the first 3 barricades, overwhelming the police with force and mass. He contributed to the movement of the Trump sign. He participated in a group push against the police. Even if Epps did not physically touch law enforcement or go inside the building, which I disagree with, he undoubtedly engaged in collective aggressive conduct. Yeah, collective aggressive conduct. Is that not violent conduct? Like, if they wanted to punish him, they would say he was attacking the police. He was using signs to thrust the sign into the heroic cops. But the mob's size is what made it so powerful. The police were massively outnumbered and overwhelmed. And Epps was not just one person among many, however. Beginning in the middle of the night, he worked to build that mob, to build the size of it. He was a tall, loud, repetitive messenger. He was one of the primary cheerleaders in the crowd, advocating for breaching the perimeter that was restricted. He was encouraging people to go into the building en masse. He was at the very forefront of the group. He breached the first barricades. Now, while he did not tear down any fencing himself, he immediately and eagerly ran behind those that did. His presence and large stature, his 6'4" size, contributed to the power, the mass, and the weight of the mob. And these emboldened others as they were going in behind him. With people like Epps setting the example and leading the way, thousands followed and stormed the Capitol. So don't you punish the person who's like the front person? Like, isn't that why Enrique Tarrio got hit hard? Isn't that why Stuart Rhodes is getting hit the hardest? Ray Epps was the prime mover. Now, in this way, and by his own admissions, Epps literally assisted in turning a trickle of people that the police could have contained into a flood that they could not. Maybe the whole thing doesn't happen but for Ray Epps. Now, once he got inside, he was connected and he participated in 2 violent incidents. First, Epps used the sign as a battering ram against police officers, and a preponderance of the evidence suggests that Epps was aware of this, even contributed to it. He even attempted to reach for the sign after it cleared his space, and once it was beyond his grasp, he pointed forward towards the police and towards their line. Even if he did not intend to harm them, it was the effect of his actions. This sounds like bad stuff, man. It's like, wow. One Capitol Police officer described the sign's frame as so heavy it took 15 officers to remove the sign. Other courts have found that the use of a sign as a battering ram is assault with a dangerous weapon. That's weird. Is Ray Epps charged with that? No. After the sign crashed and broke the police line, the mob of rioters, which included Epps, surged forward. They took advantage. They pushed back, and Epps' large size was an asset. Also, the night before, he worked to build the size of the mob. He left the rally to march before Trump was even done speaking. He ran to be in the front of the group. When those agitators broke down the signs, Epps was right behind them. Epps and the other rioters cleared a path and inspired others to engage in dangerous and lawless behavior as well. And once inside, once the West Plaza, he was an instrumental presence. Accordingly, they say the nature and the circumstances of this offense established the clear need for a serious sentence of just 6 months in jail. All of that. 6 months in jail. It's nuts. It's insane, okay? Because Stuart Rhodes is 20 plus years. Enrique Tarrio, I think, is 17, 18 years. Those guys weren't there. Ray Epps was physically there leading the charge. They give him 6 months in jail. And they call it a serious sentence. This is your Department of Justice, who cries every single time they even think about Donald Trump. It's crazy. Now, it's obviously a double standard. There's obviously something more going on here, but we'll finish. Now, as set forth, Epps served 4 years in the Marines, honorably discharged, military training. He's also someone with capabilities, you'd presume. Now, while his military service is laudable, it makes his conduct even more troubling. True. Former military member, particularly one with specialized training, Epps knew better. But Epps' case is unlike others. This is why he gets a smoking sweetheart deal. His repeated attempts to de-escalate the conflict, his immediate and fulsome cooperation with law enforcement just 2 days after the riot, and the widespread impact by the conspiracy theory. What? They're going to say that because we think there's something askew here, because there obviously is, that he was acting as a federal agent. And again, we're not saying that he was acting as a federal agent who's like employed with a badge. Something went down here. Sounds like this guy orchestrated, by their own admission, and by his own admission, I orchestrated it. He admits it. They admit it. We're saying that he was an orchestrator for something, right? You gave him a sweetheart deal for doing it. A theory that continues to affect him, but it also undermines the integrity of the ongoing and overall federal prosecution. So you see, that's why they're mad, because Ray Epps is being used to show that they are not a justice agency at all. They show it themselves. They don't need Ray Epps to point it out. Ray Epps is just like an obvious example. It's a symbol. It's a flag post. We can all see it. Literally a big, tall dude. So other than his 4 year as in Marines, Epps has never been a federal agent. Yes, we don't think he collected a paycheck from you. Got it. He was not a federal agent or working at the direction of a federal agent on January. January 6th or in January. So again, I think this is just, prosecutor speak. This is just garbage, FBI speak. No, of course not. Your informants are not working at the direction of you. You're not directing them to do things for you. Like, for example, do you think the FBI would say we directed the Whitmer defendants to do anything? Of course not. Now, Epps only acted in furtherance of his own misguided belief that I'm sure that they exacerbated had been stolen. Now, however, due to the outrage that's directed at Epps as a result of that false conspiracy, which we doubt, he has been forced to sell his business. He's been forced to move to a different state. Let me ask you this. Do you think any other J6ers have been forced to sell their businesses or to close their businesses? Do you think any other J6ers have been forced to move? Any other J6ers have been forced to live reclusively? Like, does that justify a 6-month sentence? Defendants has suffered adverse ancillary consequences to their lives. Many have lost their jobs, and sentence courts have generally rejected arguments about that. We've already been punished enough by society, but why are they including that here then? So the court should also note that Epps identified himself just 2 days after the riot as soon as he discovered the FBI was seeking info about him. He then provided several reliable information, okay, during several key interviews. So what came out of those interviews, right? This guy is setting everything up and then orchestrating the whole thing and then turning it all over to the feds. Why did that happen? Now, the need for the sentence reflects the seriousness of the offense. His 6-month sentence, which I'll maybe do 4 on, even if the judge gives him the 6, they say the attack on the Capitol was an attack on the rule of law. And so we cannot ever deal with this if this was just simply a political protest. And this is an attack on democracy itself. And so we have deterrence goals. We have to deter people from doing this. We've got general deterrence and specific deterrence. So general crimes are deterred by putting people in prison. And what about Ray Epps? Well, we don't really need specific deterrence for him because he turned himself in voluntarily and already spoke at length. He already gave Liz Cheney whatever she wanted. And so even though this caused damage to the democracy of America, a just punishment has to deter Epps. Among other things, Epps appears to continue to believe that concerns by him and others, he continues to believe questions about the legitimacy of the presidential election justified the storming of the Capitol. So Epps is not even, he's still an insurrectionist. He appears to continue to believe that concerns of him and others about the legitimacy justified the storming of the Capitol. So other people go in front of the judges and they say, I regret everything. I've rejected everything. I think that Joe Biden's amazing. He's the president for sure. And the judges still say, I don't care. You're going to jail for 3 years, 5 years. Go away. Not Ray Epps, though. Ray Epps is like, no, it was still rigged and I'd do it again. Moreover, Epps explained his own presence at the storefront of the rioters who broke through the initial barricades with the unapologetic statement. He said, Marines are always in the front, not in the back. Now, despite his own time in service to the nation, Epps failed to recognize that this aphorism refers to Marines acting as the tip of the spear for the government, not against the government. And he gave a bunch of interviews on 60 Minutes, the New York Times, and other things. He assures the government that Epps would not take additional action if he thought it was justified or that his presence would be helpful. And so the court must sentence Epps in a manner that's sufficient to deter him. Now, they say, as the court is aware, we need to avoid unwarranted sentencing disparities. Epps is getting 6 months. As the court is aware, the government has charged hundreds of individuals for their role in this, and the court must sentence Epps based on his own conduct and the relevant characteristics. No previously sentenced case contains the same balancing of the aggravating and the mitigating factors here. Epps's case is unique, and they gave him one, just totally ridiculous charge, disorderly conduct. It's a Class A misdemeanor, didn't even charge him with a felony. And while Epps's case is unique, other judges have sentenced capital breach defendants according to relevant cases there. For example, they say in United States versus Brendan Straka, while Straka did not enter the Capitol building, he did hold others, and the judge sentenced him to 3 months of home detention, right? So he got a good deal. While both Straka and Epps helped build the mob, Epps did so over a longer time period than Straka. And so they give us some more case law here. But we don't want sentencing disparities. Neither do we. Yeah, they should go back and give the Oath Keepers, the rest of the Oath Keepers, 6-month sentences. Now, the Victim and the Witness Protection Act says the following, and it says here, the principles are straightforward. The parties agreed Epps has $500 in restitution. That's it. So sentencing requires the careful balancing of these things. This is the DOJ. And so Ray Epps needs a serious, very serious 6 months in jail, 6 months in prison. Why? So he learns about the consequences of his behavior. And while recognizing, accepting responsibility, he also de-escalated conflicts, and he also cooperated with the feds and Congress. Therefore, 6 months is appropriate according to Michael M. Gordon, who is a part of the Capitol Siege section. Really tough guys over there. And this is a joke, right? Obviously, we've covered so many J6 cases here. It's like, what? They go through and they whitewash all of his misconduct. He was at the tip of the spear by his own admission, orchestrating the whole thing. 6 months? Now, to be fair, like if they want to give 6 months to everybody who's even close to that, that's an improvement. They can go back and we can apply that to every single J6er and see if it applies. Now, Ray Epps also submitted a letter to the judge. He says, "Hey, dear Judge Boasberg, I know I'm going to be sentenced soon, but the guilt, remorse, and humiliation that I put my wife and my family through has been overwhelming. The past 2 years of harassment and threats and being forced to repeatedly move to try to hide from people is making my life difficult. Now I," says Ray Epps, "I am a peaceful follower of Jesus Christ. I had what I thought at the time were valid concerns. I traveled to DC to accompany my son. I take full responsibility for trespassing. Now I put myself and my wife and family through a nightmare. I've let them all down. I'm sincerely sorry for going to Washington. I do not regret trying to calm people down and de-escalate. Your Honor, I want you to know I love the United States. Now I do now and have always believed that our Constitution was God-inspired and as such the most correct way for our freedom and happiness on earth. I also believe in the democratic process, and I've learned a lot. I've also learned not to put my trust in politicians. Fox News and some other media and social media outlets have betrayed me with their election lies. And then when the lies were exposed, they created a conspiracy to blame the insurrection on me. The blame of the insurrection is not on the FBI. I think it is. It's on those who are at the Capitol and engaged in those insurrectionist activities and those who misled Americans like myself. Now, Your Honor, my decision to attend J6 has been devastating to my family. The resulting impact has fragmented our families, taken our livelihood, and impacted our health. Yeah, I believe you shouldn't have been there, doing those things. And it's wild that you're getting a 6-month sentence. Like, I understand people make mistakes. I'm regretful. I'm remorseful. I'm angry at myself for attending. A lot of other J6ers feel this way, but they're not getting 6 months, okay? They're not getting the DOJ that whitewashes their crimes or alleged crimes. So the question is about another J6er. You may know this man, FreeStateWill on the X platform. He's also pretty shocked about this 6-month deal. He says, incredible. He's been charged with J6 crimes. At FreeStateWill on the X writes, "I have filed a motion to dismiss charges in my case. Why? Due to selective prosecution." Now, while the government alleges that Mr. Ray Epps engaged in felonious conduct, as they did, we just read that, they charged him with a single misdemeanor. That's weird. He was assaulting police with a sign. Disorderly conduct, though. Or why they indicted me on 8 counts and they ignored the same mitigating factors for him. So make sure you're following FreeStateWill. He's filing his own motions here, doing a great job. And this is what this one looks like. 4 pages. This is a motion for a discovery and dismissal of the charges due to selective prosecution by the DOJ, which just gave Ray Epps a 6-month deal. He says, "On February 12th, I was arrested in Topeka, Kansas." Ray Epps never got arrested. It was a pre-indictment charge under allegations related to the Capitol events. "On February 17th, says Mr. Pope, the government filed an 8-count indictment against me, alleging even though I was entirely nonviolent, unlike Ray Epps, the government erroneously believed that I'd violated federal statutes." He says on September 18th, the government filed a 1-count information against Ray Epps. Ray Epps, they said, disorderly conduct. Now, Epps was allowed, not arrested, to arrange a plea agreement before charges were brought, and he pled guilty to a single charge at his very initial hearing. By contrast, the government promised to allow me to self-report if charges were brought against me, but instead, that didn't happen. The government showed up to my house with armed officers to arrest me, and they made me spend 5 days in jail before giving me an initial hearing, before that could take place before a magistrate judge. Nice. Now, my conduct, he says, is distinct from Epps in that I did not urge anyone to go into the Capitol on January 5th and January 6th. I did not leave the president's speech early, and I was not one of the people to first run onto the Capitol grounds like Epps was. I also did not push a sign into police officers, but the government claims in their sentencing memorandums that a variety of distinctive and compelling mitigating factors apply to Ray Epps, that they led the government to exercise their prosecutorial discretion, and that they could offer Ray Epps a pre-indictment misdemeanor, even though he engaged in felonious conduct. Now, among the mitigating factors that the government listed was that Ray Epps turned himself into the FBI, that Epps cooperated with the FBI, gave interviews, that Epps attempted to de-escalate individuals on J6. But in my case, the government seemingly ignored these same mitigating factors, even though I was not a provocateur like Epps, and I did not assault the police with a sign like Epps did. I, says Mr. Pope, reported my presence to the FBI's TIP website on January 9th, the first full day I was back home in Kansas, and I participated in an interview with the FBI soon thereafter. In fact, I did this despite not being on the FBI wanted list like Ray Epps was. Didn't show up on the most wanted violent list. On January 6th, my brother and I also had friendly interactions with the Capitol Police, and we de-escalated an individual who was banging on the marble with one of the stanchions that held velvet ropes. We voluntarily left the building, and my brother fist bumped an officer right before walking out the memorial doors. We also left the Capitol grounds before Ray Epps did. As Jason Crawford, the former prosecutor assigned to this case, correctly noted, I was entirely peaceful on January 6th. Ray Epps was not. He was in a rugby scrum. Yet despite me being entirely peaceful, while Epps was provoking the crowds and assaulting assaulting police, and despite the same mitigating factors being present in my case, the government has treated me much more severely than Epps. They have brought 8 charges against me rather than 1, and rather than offering a single misdemeanor plea, the government tried to force me to plead to obstruction of an official proceeding, a felony, with a 20-year max sentence. 6 months for Ray, 20 years for this guy. Now, with mitigating factors thus being equal, it seems the government has engaged in discriminatory and selective prosecution on the basis of some bias or unjustifiable standard. This unjustified arbitrary classification may be that I had run for local office in Kansas, or maybe that I was enrolled in a PhD program at Kansas State, or that I had spent more than a year of my life living as the only white man in an all-black town, or that I had led dialogues on racial diversity for the National Park Service, or it could be my religion, or that I was engaged in journalistic activities that the prosecutor resented. Oh, he's outspoken. Oh, that's the problem. Or that the government favors persons who provoke crowds to do things that the government prosecutes, like Mr. Epps did, over those who don't. Or that the prosecutors resented me being better looking than themselves. Boom! So true. FreeStateWill's a good looking man, and prosecutors are hideous. That's why they all look the same, because they're all contorted with their injustice energy. It's like the dark side. You know, like in Star Wars when his face gets all wrinkled up? That's them. Gosh, they're ugly. And William is handsome, good looking dude. Or it could be any other unjustified or arbitrary discrimination which are prohibited by the United States case law. But clearly, Lady Justice has not weighed all things equally. The government has bestowed favor upon Ray Epps, and they have not bestowed equally on me. I therefore move this court to dismiss all charges in my case with prejudice due to selective prosecution by these ugly prosecutors, or in the absence of an immediate dismissal to compel discovery be produced for why, oh why, was Mr. Epps being given the government's unjustified and arbitrary favor. Amazing from the very handsome William Pope, filing this on his own out of Topeka, Kansas, and sending this in to the DOJ. Amazing. And I think it's really very useful. Okay, this is a very useful motion. First of all, is absolutely true. So beautifully is a compare and contrast to what happened and the double standards that exist. They want 20 years for obstruction because they're ugly and because he has an outspoken X account. In the ECF filing, the DOJ incorrectly alleged that I reported my presence on J12. Not true. My phone records show I did not visit the TIP website after January 9th, the correct date. I've also communication records. I told several persons on J9 that I had reported. We got communication records with my brother on J8. I only waited until January 9th to report because my brother wanted to consult an attorney first, which is good advice. So amazing. This is William Pope who submitted this, and we're hopeful that he's very successful in this because there are major double standards here, and he is able to articulate it quite clearly for us. And so, my friends, I would encourage you to go and follow him. He's doing really great work on the X platform. And of course, he's at FreeStateWill, which looks like this right there, at FreeStateWill, been charged with crimes by our Injustice Department, fighting his case aggressively and articulating and exposing for all of us to see the double standard that is out there. And so if you want to follow this X post, I have re-X'd it, reposted it on my account at FreeStateWill. We're here and pulling for you, my friend. So thanks for your amazing work. Motion to dismiss. We hope it is accepted because it is a double standard. Ray Epps gets 6 months and they want other people to go to prison for literal decades for conduct that is less serious than Ray's. So what's going on? You can be the judge of that, but there's more to this story, in my humble opinion, than the DOJ is letting on. They're going to tell us this is a serious sentence for this guy who may have orchestrated the whole thing. So we'll be here continuing to cover this, my friends. Thank you for subscribing. Thanks for sharing this with a friend or family member so they can see what's happening for the J6ers who are going through this saga. We'll be here continuing to cover. Thanks for checking out robertgovea.com. Sign up for our daily newsletter there. We also have all of the PDFs are available there. So if you want to read any of the PDFs or get a summary of the show, robertgovea.com is the place to go. We got our newest merches there at the robertgovea.com shop. You can get the Watcher symbol on the hat and sport it proudly. It's Justicia. It's Lady Liberty. It's got the sword to cut through the bonds of ignorance, the shield so we can defend our communities and identify ourselves. And we're grateful for your support, supporting the work that we do here on the show. Grab some gear at robertgovea.com/shop. We'll be back. We'll see what Ray Epps ultimately gets. Thanks for subscribing and joining us as we do.